Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Ray's Talk Show, where we talk about politics and the hottest issues from the perspective of the Latino community and the voiceless, including the voice of Stephon Clark, whose voice was tragically silenced this week in Sacramento, California. You can listen to Ray's Talk Show anywhere you download a podcast: iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube. Anywhere you can download a podcast, or just check us out on social media, on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, and on Instagram at Ray's Latino Talk. And email us your comments, reflections, ideas for shows. If you just want to holler at us, you can check us out on email at podcastrays@gmail.com. Again, I told you weren't gonna. Your long hiatus was over. My regular co-host and the only Dominican, I would say the most prominent Dominican who did not receive a Premio Soberano over this week, Elbert Garcia. Elbert, welcome back.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ray. Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy, these conversations, and it's good to know that we can still have them. So it's a good thing.
You're right about that. And later in the show, we're going to talk about Elbert in the shout-out segment. Is going to talk a little bit about the significance beyond the starlets and some of the A-list celebrities that were on the red carpet at the Premios Soberano this week. Some more real significant stuff that happened there that we wanted to note. We'll talk later in the show. This is going to be, we got a lot of political conversation later in the show. We're going to be interviewing as part of our series to highlight some of the candidates from our community that are jumping into the fray for the first time. Some exciting elections happening around the country. Democratic candidate for Congress in New Mexico, Damon Martinez, will be on the show later in an interview that was taped earlier this week to talk about his candidacy. He's got a great personal story, Elbert, and I know we can never talk enough New Mexico on Ray's Talk Show. So listen for that episode. Later in the show, we're also going to talk about the significance of another set of elections in Chicago this week and what it means not only for the future of Latino politics, but specifically what lessons we can learn from Chicago about Latinos rising in the democratic politics in urban centers independently. There's some Republicans that are taking a cue from Donald Trump and being complete pricks. We need to discuss, and many other things here related to the political world here on Ray's Talk Show and other issues. But we wanted to start this week's episode with talking about sort of where we go from here as it relates to really three incidents that have impacted us over the last month, but specifically over this past week. So all of you know about the terrible tragedies, the bombings in Austin, Texas, that resulted in 2 people passing away and a few others injured. A series of bombings that ultimately led to the bomber himself, a domestic terrorist, Mark Anthony Conditt, literally allowed the time to blow himself up a few days ago. This on the heels of the terrible mass shooting at Parkland High School in South Florida, near where Elbert Garcia resides, of Nicholas Cruz, who was recently indicted formally and charged in the murder of 17 individuals and the injuring of many others. And just almost hours ago, the tragic murder of Stephon Clark, a young African-American man who was literally just trying to get into the back of his grandmother, was in his grandmother's yard with a cell phone, who was shot over 20 times and killed for reasons that seem very suspicious. Elbert, when we think about these different issues, and there's a meme that sums up kind of the feeling that many of us are having when we think about the totality of these tragedies, thinking about the fact that, and the meme says something to the effect of Nicholas Cruz kills 17 people, injures many others, terrorizes a whole school. He's arrested peacefully. Mark Anthony Conditt is literally given enough space to blow himself up before he's detained or shot at or injured by law enforcement. And Stephon Clark, trying to just go to the back door of his grandmother's house with a cell phone, gets shot 20 times. And a lot of the media messaging has been criticized by activists of color online, specifically how the lack of tagging of Mark Anthony Conditt as a domestic terrorist, the sheriff in Austin sort of harping on the fact that this was a troubled young man after listening to the 25-minute voicemail message that he left about his reasons for doing such heinous acts. So we're left to wonder, Elbert, where do we go from here as it relates to, are we going to have the courage in this country to have the honest conversations about how to help these troubled young men, but in a way that's real and reflects the realities of race, class, and all these other issues, law enforcement, media portrayal that we're struggling with these various tragedies?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is that there's so many things that we have been avoiding. I mean, for heaven's sake, we haven't even had good gun research, since last century. Right? I mean, think about it, right? I mean, we laugh about it and we're like, wow, the years go by quickly, but right? But this gag order on research for CDC research is what, 1996? It's almost, you can't even have a basic conversation about how to treat, violence, whether you're talking about like violence in terms of these mass shooters, like this mass shooter in terms of in Parkland, or the serial bomber, or someone who basically is looking to find their own power in the hurt of others, right? So there's been some talk on the Hill that maybe that this stuff with the activism around Parkland, that may itself get lifted, and if it does, that would be at least some small victory that could at least plant seeds for further action. But look, this thing with when Mr. Clark, God bless, rest in power. I mean, it's horrible. It's horrible, and the idea that law enforcement who are trained, right? That trained law enforcement would be so afraid, right, of this one individual, right? And again, knowing where they are, right? Knowing that they're entering a home, knowing into those things, as opposed to someone who is popping off bullets, right? And clearly shooting folks, right? They managed to keep him, to bring him to justice without, necessarily without killing him, right? I mean, like, it's just, and again, I think the larger question is that I think a lot of times people want to try to pit one tragedy with another, or pit tragedies against each other, right? And all these things are tragic, right? But the question is, like, what do we have control over, right? What do you do, right? And I think the more that the light shines, first of all, in terms of the continuing abuse, that it's not just individual law enforcement, but that there's a law enforcement system that's built to dehumanize and depersonalize situations like this, right? That's a systemic problem, right? And at the end of the day, if these officers, if they can't go into a home, or go into a situation where, I mean, it's 20 shots, right? I mean, this is the same thing in terms of Amadou Diallo that everyone talk about, right? Like, it's, and again, I understand, having spoken to friends or family members in law enforcement, that, like, it's pretty unrealistic to think, oh, you're going to have just one shot, right? Or two shots here, like in a scenario where you're afraid, right?
Yeah, but he was clearly down. I mean, it was after the fourth or fifth shot, it was pretty obvious.
That's, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's the hard thing to swallow, right? Because it doesn't make sense, right? And it is systematic, right?
And when they were looking for him, for like breaking windows. So it wasn't like there was even a gun with part of the crimes that he was alleged that they were looking for him for. So it's none of it.
I mean, damn, yeah. I mean, it's like, talk about over excessive use of force, right? I mean, like, again, it's a pattern, right? Like, you can't, you can't have a toy gun. You can't walk down with a hoodie and
you can't be in your grandmother's backyard. You can't be in your grandmother's backyard.
In your own grandmother's backyard, man. Like, I look at my backyard, right? And I'm like, what the hell would happen in terms of here? Right? Like, what would happen?
I mean, where are you supposed to be?
But this is the thing also to remember, is that the larger issue, and I know having sat in on a couple of like youth-led forums here in Miami, right? Shout out to there's a busload, at least a busload of 100, or at least 2 busloads, right? Of about 100 students from Miami, from folks in Miami and from folks like in Liberty City and Overtown and Homestead, who are traveling up through Atlanta to DC for the march, right? For the March on Our Lives, really trying to reset and expand the narrative, right? The fact that these things are affecting, students, children of color, right? And they don't, and these children of color don't appear on Time magazine, right? And again, it's not about the Parkland students getting their prompts and moving the thing along. It's something, that's not what it is, right? I mean, again, you talk to students, and students, again, because these Parkland students have actually done a really great job, at least down here in South Florida, of actually not just expanding out to other parts of the country, but even within Miami, right? Going to the Liberty cities, going into inner cities, and participating in these conversations. And Ray, you know what the scariest thing about it is? The scariest thing that I hear sometimes is among our children of color in our urban areas is that for some of them, they don't know how you can actually achieve safety without law enforcement, without the heavy hand of law enforcement, right? And so they're thinking about, we have to have cops in school, right? Because isn't this how it's supposed to get done?
Yeah, we need law.
Some of them are talking about it that way.
Yeah, we need the metal detectors. Yeah, we need. So
I mean, so how do you do that, right? How do they? And that's, I think, and we've got to challenge ourselves, and we've got to challenge. We've got to challenge ourselves to help bridge that gap, right? That understanding that yes, they are leaders, but we also have to be mentors to them, and we have to go back to the drawing board and say, how is it? Yes, it's with the resources that folks need, right? Mental health counselors, social justice workers. I mean, there's a lot of trauma going on in general.
And I'll go back to what you said earlier, Elbert, related to that in terms of looking for solutions. Is that you do have to have the courage to want to find the solutions, right? Because in doing that, you're going to turn to data, and you're going to turn to having holistic conversations about the totality of the problem, and avoid these sort of knee-jerk reaction talking points that are politicized, don't really address the problem. I mean, we probably as a society, and even on our side of the debate, probably focus more on the quote-unquote mental health issue than is probably the real reasons, because part of it is that we don't have the data to really know. So we're sort of grasping at straws, and some initial data reflects that it's not really a quote-unquote mental health issue as much as isolation and sort of social isolation. It isn't quite, someone's losing it mentally. It's that they're feeling, there's something missing here. And the point is, it probably is a combination of a bunch of these things that we talk about oftentimes, including, of course, getting automatic weapons out of the hands of people that aren't qualified to use them. But the reality is that when you want to address a crisis, you get everyone together and you have an honest conversation, and you match that with data, and then you put policies in place. So thinking about our Attorney General in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, District Attorney rather, and he's putting in, he's implementing policies like, sort of moving people that are convicted of prostitution into a sort of what's called a dawn court, to before just throwing them in jail, to really sort of address what are the issues that are leading to you turn people, mostly women, of course, turning to prostitution in the streets. How do we deal? Basically, he's basically made smoking marijuana illegal in Philadelphia, essentially, because he's saying we're not going to prosecute it. So these sort of tangible addressing, is parole too long? And is it a trap for people to just bring them back to the criminal justice system? So, when we're thinking about these issues and how to deal with them beyond the rhetoric and the politics of it. It really is about having the leadership and the vision to say, no, there actually are tangible institutional issues, ways we can tackle some of these things. Look, the body camera policies are an attempt in that direction. And so while we're not seeing necessarily a diminishing of people's animal to make these sort of rash decisions when it comes to oftentimes the lives of black males in these situations. But at the very least, we're moving towards trying policy solutions. So, it's very important that, and I think the March for Our Lives coming up this weekend, which we support 1,000%, is looking to address is how do we, whether it's gun control, mental health, others, sort of in-school remedies beyond, supporting young people when they're in school and feeling isolated and feeling without direction, instead of using those resources to make our schools like prisons. How do we institutionalize solutions and attempts for solutions, even if it doesn't all work or isn't all as effective as we would like? At least we're moving along with the best thinking and the best data to make informed, holistic decisions. And you listen, Elbert. Yes, Elbert.
No, and look, more than anything, we're listening to Ray's podcast over here. I know I cut you off there, so I didn't want to.
No worries.
Go into that way there. I think the other thing that I think in having these conversations on a very local level too, and again, these conversations that people it may not get the headlines because of for political reasons, but folks are talking, right? And despite the tragedy that happened, over on the West Coast, you do have law enforcement officers talking and trying to figure this stuff out, having conversations with community activists, and trying to figure these things out. But the truth of the matter is that to break down this system of violence, right, and the system that also that people are profiting off in terms of violence, right, whether directly or indirectly, to do that, there's going to be a power shift, right? And that's the thing. I mean, and we talk about these Parkland students and this generation trying to move elected officials, and there's certainly the possibility of this moment turning into a larger movement. But there is going to be a backlash against that, right? Because the truth is that the way violence operates, not just in the inner city, but also kind of sanitized violence in all different types of the world, is that it's also a way for people to exercise power, to hold power, to feel like they actually have power and control over their lives, right? And so what do you do when you shift the anger of that power from a gun or from brute force to other things like your intellect, intelligence, the way you maneuver, the way you can innovate, right? Who gets left down and who doesn't, right? When a law enforcement reforms itself, right, so that it's a little more community focused, a little less trigger happy, who loses out on that? Which cops on the beat who are used to people being afraid of them, how do they now operate, right? And what do they do or not do because now they can't operate that way, right? And I just want to point that out. Like, there are people in our communities talking about this stuff, right? So trying to figure that stuff out. But we also have to recognize at some point there's going to be a power shift. And look, people don't like to shift economics, right? And people don't like to shift resources away. Imagine that when people have to give up some of their power. And the truth is that, like, for this situation to really move forward in the direction it needs to, some of the things that hold power and some of the people who hold power in our lives in this situation, they're going to have to lose their power. Right? They're going to have to, you're going to have to reshift that, and that's going to be something. Are we willing, and do we have enough faith in that to do it? To use things like practices like restorative justice, and to figure out a way to keep our community safe without the threat of force. That's not to say that there's not a role for law enforcement, right? But you don't see cops in other places carrying over as much firepower as they do here in the United States, right? You can clearly enforce the law. You can still have authority without having an abuse of power.
No, and the other notion that becomes crystal clear this week is that we have to continue to demand diversity in the corporate media and promote independent media that reflects the diversity of this country. I mean, the amount of reaction and the blind spots that you saw at headlines from the New York Times and the Washington Post and others about sort of the timidity of how they described the domestic terrorists that terrorized people in Austin, Texas over the last few weeks really speaks to that need. So we have to continue to support not only diversity within the corporate media, but also support independent media like Ray's Talk Show, so we can have these conversations and really sort of push back on sort of one view of a situation and a tragedy, and understand that race is a lens, as we'll talk about later. Some of the comments from Republican legislators this week as it related to Latinos. Race is just a lens, unfortunately, that is permeating all these conversations. And the biggest problem is that there's a big chunk of the United States that wants to hide their face and not have honest conversations about it. And you're listening to Ray's Talk Show with Elbert Garcia and Ray Collazo. Before we get to our conversation earlier this week with Democratic congressional candidate out of New Mexico, Damon Martinez, I did want to quickly note that, Elbert, we have another shakeup in the White House. The National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General, and a Philly guy, by the way, H.R. McMaster, has been given the boot. I think he's the one that dropped that dime on the note that Trump didn't listen to a few days ago about not congratulating Putin on his election win. But nevertheless, he's gone. John Bolton, who by most analysts' perspective is probably the absolute worst person to become the next National Security Advisor, is going to come into play. This is a man of conspiracies, who's one of the most hawkish people in our national defense community. So, hide under your tables, people. So, the thing I just wanted to say about this is that, when you're dealing with someone that's going to be in the preparation and ultimately the ongoing conversations with North Korea, this is incredibly dangerous to have this man sort of co-signing on Trump's hawkish instincts. But the other thing I want to say is it really is a time for leadership, because in the case of Lieutenant H.R. McMaster, he's had a storied career. He seems like someone that was, sort of pushing back and trying to at least be a check on the president for his most reckless instincts. And so we have to call out people like him and Rex Tillerson. If you really are patriots, if you really are people that care about this country, you need to speak up. And you need to talk to, because obviously Trump's base isn't going to listen to people like Elbert Garcia and Rafael and Ray Collazo. So, you need to speak up, and you need to be very transparent to the country and to the world about the danger that now exists in the White House. Let's listen now to our interview with Democratic congressional candidate out of New Mexico, Damon Martinez, and we'll come back and talk about politics from coast to coast on Ray's Talk Show. Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. We are so happy in our continual series to highlight some of the exciting new candidates and exciting candidates in general around the country who have been inspired to throw their hat in the ring, particularly our Latinos and Latinx community that's deciding to run for Congress, which is certainly needing more representation on every level, but in particular the federal level. In that series, we're so happy to have first-time candidate, former U.S. attorney, 10th generation New Mexican, and someone who has a very special connection to the Ray's Talk Show community, calling in for New Mexico, Damon Martinez. Damon, welcome to Ray's Talk Show.
Well, good evening, and thank you for allowing me to do this. This is a great opportunity for me.
I know, Damon. So excited to have you on the show, and we'll talk about our special personal connection later in the interview. But I did want to share, Damon has an incredible background as working 16 years for the Department of Justice. He wears as a badge of honor, I hear, that he's one of the 46 U.S. attorneys that was fired by Donald Trump sort of abruptly of March of last year. If we have time, we'll get into that. But more importantly, he's someone that served our community in New Mexico for as a former member of the Armed Services and a U.S. attorney, and now Democratic candidate for the open seat, 1st District of New Mexico, that's now held by Congresswoman Lujan Grisham. She's stepping down to run for governor. So, Damon, you've had a great career in the legal profession and serving our country in the armed services. Can you share with our Ray's Talk Show listeners what led you to this in your journey? What led to your decision? What in your background led you to decide to run for Congress this year?
Well, as you said, I'm a first-time candidate, but I've been a public servant my entire career. I've worked both in the Senate and the House, and I've been in the Department of Justice for the past 16 years, as you just highlighted. there's a number of issues that I've worked on, and on March 10th, when President Trump fired me along with the other 45 U.S. attorneys from across the nation, I basically had unfinished business. There's been issues that I've been working on that are absolutely important to me, and let me just give you an example of one of them. I'm one of those families that was personally affected by this heroin opiate epidemic. And so when I became U.S. Attorney in 2014, I realized that we can't prosecute our way out of it. So we joined up with a medical school here in New Mexico, and we took a comprehensive approach. I'm very proud of what we've done, and let me just give you an example of something that we did. We created a first-of-its-kind program to help those re-entering the community from prison or jail to acclimate so that they don't, so that, keep them from recommitting a crime, basically helping them out with transportation, employment, and housing. With this issue that I've been working on, basically this heroin opiate epidemic, going forward to Congress, I truly believe that there's some pharmaceutical companies that are preying upon a generation of Americans, and literally what they're doing is they're addicting them to these opiates. So I want to be able to hold big pharmaceutical companies accountable for this drug epidemic that we're in.
Damon, it's so interesting because oftentimes when people aren't in tune with our community, these sort of issues are addressed very much, particularly people in law enforcement, with law enforcement solutions, right? So if we have problems, we have people causing issues or even hurting themselves. It's, and we even hear it now on the national level, right? This, throw them all in the brink. And I really found interesting in your bio and on your website that this issue around these many issues related to health care and the health of our community is the first priority in your platform. So I think that's very interesting that even though you come from a law enforcement perspective, you see the importance in your district and in your community around really focusing as a top priority health issues. Can you share a little bit more about what led to how that's evolved as you've developed your campaign platform?
Well, again, I go back to my record, and that's what sets me apart in this race. Let me give you another example and why it's so important to me. I became aware of a specific incident, and so as a result, when I was U.S. Attorney, I asked the Department of Justice to investigate how our largest university here in New Mexico handled sexual assault. And what we found out was that the system was corrupted, and it was basically benefiting the perpetrator over the victim. We changed the entire system there. And in essence, what we have now is a system that provides resources for that survivor and provides an opportunity for that survivor to seek justice. How this is important going forward is with the current Secretary of Education DeVos, she's now re-examining the entire sexual assault standard, which can only hurt an agreement like ours that was put in place to help the entire university deal with the sexual assault issue. These issues that I'm talking about that's unfinished for me, I'm taking this extremely personal because these are people in our community who have benefited by the changes we've made, and in turn, what this administration is doing, it's going backwards and it's making us less safe. And that's how I'm focusing in this campaign, is basically saying, look, it's good government to do what we've done, and what this administration is doing and how they're doing it is only hurting the community.
And you're listening to Damon Martinez, Democratic candidate for the 1st District, Congressional District of New Mexico, now held by Congresswoman Michelle Luzon Grissom, who's running for governor. So it's an open seat. Damon's in a fight. He has a very competitive primary coming up, but he's someone we thought it was very important for people to know, and we're very excited about Damon's candidacy here on Race Talk Show. Damon, it's talk a little bit about New Mexico and your district specifically. Can I tell you, I love New Mexico. I've only been there once, but after I got to spend some time there, I didn't get to Santa Fe, but I've been to Albuquerque and been to Las Cruces and eat some fantastic red chile in the southern part of the state, and have a lot of family who have gone through New Mexico through the military over the years. So just a wonderful place, a lot of great leaders there. So talk to us a little about this district, and as you're campaigning, I know you're campaigning vigorously Tell us a little about the district and tell us what you're hearing from people in the Southwest and some of the communities that you're talking to about their concerns about, politics and what they're telling you while you're traveling throughout your district.
Well, we have a wonderful place here in New Mexico. The district it's the center part of New Mexico, and what we have a majority-minority state. In total, the Hispanic population, or Latinos, is about 47%. We're about 7% Native American and about 2% African American. We are the fifth largest state in the nation, but our population is just a little over 2 million. Some of the things that I'm hearing as far as going around is the way that this president and this administration is there is not only disagreement with this president's policies, but now I believe the way people are feeling is our democracy, the institutions that we hold dear to uphold our democracy, are now in jeopardy. And what I mean by that is the people in the community are feeling that our press is being undercut, our court system, our Congress, our EPA, our State Department is being underfunded. And what I'm feeling from when I'm speaking to people is we now have to protect our democracy itself, and that's how important this election is.
And again, you're listening to Damon Martinez, candidate for 1st Congressional District in New Mexico, and a new friend, but a great friend to Ray's talk show. Damon, can you talk a little bit about? It's interesting on your platform, on your website, which you can see at DamonMartinezForCongress.com, that one of the pillars of your platform you discuss being serious about prosperity. So, it's I find it very interesting and I think very thoughtful that you look at economic prosperity very much through an education lens. There's many of our states in the Southwest, New Mexico, I think about Nevada, I think about Arizona, that quite honestly are lagging behind when it comes to educational access for students, particularly students from diverse communities, and that there's many reasons for that, but principally a lack of commitment traditionally by in more recent history of state lawmakers to investing in our community. So can you talk about this tie-in that you see between education and economic prosperity for New Mexico?
Oh, absolutely. And ultimately, education is the key. I mean, that's where we have to go. And one of the things that it's actually appalling to me is that the federal, and let me start at the graduate level or the college level. Right now, we know that the federal government is making money off of students, billions of dollars, by students paying interest. And what we have to do there is we have to relieve the students of that type of responsibility, that type of debt, to allow students to get their education and be able to come out of their education not being so far in debt that they have to struggle for the rest of their livelihood and their career just trying to get by. So I am personally dedicated to making sure that the federal government does not make money, does not benefit at the expense of students. Now, one of the things in New Mexico, and I think this is probably common across the nation, is that our education systems are underfunded. And some of the symptoms of that, we have here in New Mexico so many teachers that are having to buy supplies for their classes themselves. The system can't pay for it. Also, we have so many classroom sizes that are just overly populated. So, to me, we will know that we've adequately funded our education system when teachers don't have to buy the supplies for their classrooms themselves. And I think that a good number for students to be able to teach at is to get the classroom sizes down to about 20 students. And I understand that there's standards out there for teachers, but the important thing right there is that the student or the teachers be allowed to tailor their instruction, be allowed to be given the leeway to get to those standards, but allow them to use their expertise in getting there. Also, we need to continue re-educating our teachers as far as giving them further instruction and allowing them to get certifications so that they could continue to rise in salary, that they don't cap out at a certain amount of time and don't have any place to go. But in essence, what I'm saying is we need to support our teachers.
No, and Damon, you're touching base on so many important dynamics that we're currently seeing play out in our national, in this case, federal policy debates and policies, unfortunately, that are moving forward. So when I think about the impact of the tax cuts that took place in December, one of the things that, and again, increasing the debt is an issue in and of itself. But even if you want to make the argument that we need to sort of invest now and sort of put a smart bet down for the future, you think about the amount of money that's going, the overwhelming amount of that $1.5 trillion, which is not going to my pocket or even Damon's pocket, but it's or most anyone listening to this program and Reese Talk Show today, it's going to the most wealthiest people of our society and the largest corporations, which last time I checked the stock market are doing quite fine. So what's so frustrating about this law that was passed is that, and Damon knows the numbers better than I do, that investment, if you wanted to argue that we desperately need to make an investment, could have essentially paid off the student debt you were talking about earlier, Damon, could have done an incredible infusion of resources to our education system, could have gotten more people health care benefits, and address some of these issues you've been working on as a prosecutor and as an activist in your career. So, when we talk about some of the things that you've done in terms of changing policies at universities to protect young women and young people against sexual assault, changing policies, enacting policies to treat those addicted with drug addiction with humanity and with as the public health issue that it is, and not as criminals. That is in many ways what is missing from the debate, because oftentimes, whether it's the gun control conversation or some of these other issues that are happening that we're all aware of, and I think the opioid crisis is probably, I don't think we fully even understand how depth it is, because for everyone that sort of is an obvious someone that's obviously in need of treatment, there's many more of us that are functioning in society that we need to try to nerf their issues and support. But too often times, the Paul Ryans, the other leadership, mostly Republican Congress, sort of throw their hands up and say, well, crazy people are going to be crazy. People are going to do drugs. So can you talk about how, in your work, there's actually policies, there's things we can do. And there's actually policies that we can do, that we can institutionalize support for people and actually work on solutions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let me talk about this tax bill that they passed. You mentioned the $1.5 trillion. And you also mentioned Paul Ryan. He and they are very clear about wanting to come and revisit our safety net. And in essence, what that means is they're now going to be looking at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. For a state like New Mexico, and I'm sure this is common across the nation, Medicaid makes up 44% of the health care in New Mexico. I mean, and that is huge. So when they revisit the safety net and they're looking at Medicaid, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to block grant this, which means is they're going to try to send less money to the states, and this is what's going to help pay for their $1.5 trillion in debt that they're creating. And that's wrong. Because as we were talking with education, if people don't have health care, that creates so many problems, and for working families, for those individuals that are just trying to get by, they're not going to be able to. It's just going to put more stresses on the system. And in essence, what that's doing is, instead of trying to be proactive and trying to avoid people from getting sick, we're going to end up having to, take care of more people in the emergency room. That's going to be more expensive for everybody in the long run. Now, let's talk about, again, I'll go back to my record. One of the things, and I was very proud working under, Attorney General Eric Holder and President Obama, is they were looking at criminal justice reform. And they were talking, and under our time period, which has changed now under this new administration, prosecuting less of the mandatory minimums, prosecuting less of the enhancements, prosecuting less nonviolent offenders. And in essence, what that was going to do was that was going to take a third of, for example, the Department of Justice's budget that was being spent on prisons and being put into other places. And in essence, that was making us more safe because we were able to treat addiction or treat other issues that are in our community. Now what is coming out is by prosecuting everybody, that's going to be putting more people in prison. That's going to be driving up our costs, and it's going to be taking money away from the long-term answers such as treatment and care.
Damon, I'd be remiss, before we get into how people can learn more about your campaign, I'd be remiss, I haven't had a New Mexican on for a while, and so I wanted to, besides Damon's race, which we're following very closely and want to make sure people have an opportunity to understand how they can support Damon in his race to become a new member of Congress. He's running in the 1st District of New Mexico. That's going to be an open seat. Your future predecessor, Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham, is running for governor, and that'll be an open seat because your current governor, Susana Martinez, is outgoing. And, you know, she's been an interesting sort of political figure, not only in New Mexico, but sort of nationally, sort of been the poster child for Hispanics in the Republican Party for some time. At one point in her trajectory, she was pretty popular in the state. I was reading some polling that she sort of has had a steady decline over the last year or so, pretty precipitously. The last poll I saw, she was the 6th least popular governor in the United States. So just a thought, just to get your sort of New Mexico political analyst hat on, Damon, for a moment. Just your thought about outgoing Governor Martinez's legacy and kind of what you expect to see kind of moving forward in statewide politics.
Well, I believe that we're going to be electing a Democratic governor coming up here in the next election, and that's going to be changing policies. Governor Martinez's legacy, what she's going to be remembered for is she enacted a couple policies that severely hurt our education system in New Mexico and our healthcare system. It was unfortunate because it hurt a lot of people. And when you're talking about her becoming unpopular, you know, this is a state that was willing to consider her as the first Latina elected female governor in the country, and she was given that opportunity, she was given that responsibility, and some of her policies have just been hurtful to New Mexico, and I think that's reflected in what she said as far as her popularity now. With this new incoming governor, the Democrat candidates are talking about an increase in money to the education system, making sure that our health care is protected, and making sure that our environment is protected. And those are all crucial things. And so I'm very optimistic about this next election coming up, that we will have a Democratic governor, and the policies will change for the better.
Damon Martinez, Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District of New Mexico. Again, one of my favorite places on the planet. Let people know, Damon, how they can learn more about your campaign, how they can support your campaign. I'll be contributing as well. I want to let people know that. So anyone in my network, particularly my trial lawyers, the Jose Sanchez's, the Juan de la Torres, we have to support Damon, someone that has such a wonderful reputation in the legal community and well as an activist, and someone that served our country in many ways. Damon, let people know how they can support your campaign, learn more about it, and anything else you'd like to share with our Race Talk Show listeners.
Well, this opportunity is extremely important for me because, as I said earlier, I'm a first-time candidate. I've been a public servant my entire career. I couldn't sit this one out, and so it's only through support and help like yours and what you're asking for with your listening audience am I going to succeed in this race. So any help, any consideration you can give me, any financial contribution you can give, everything makes a difference, and that will allow me to get on TV, get my name out there, and what I stand for and what my values are. So the easiest way to look me up is at DamonMartinezForCongress.com, and let me spell my name. It's DAMON Martinez, MARTINEZ, DamonMartinezForCongress.com, DamonMartinezForCongress.com. And again, anything you can send my way is greatly appreciated.
And Damon, when is that primary again, so people know the time frame we're talking about? We don't have too much time, right? Your primary is coming up fairly soon.
Oh, no, it's coming up very quick. We're under 80 days now. It's June 5th.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. A day before my wife's birthday, so that's going to be who works for the U.S. attorneys on the East Coast, FYI. So a lot of connections. And want to finally share, and again, we're really happy to and proud to have Damon Martinez, a Democratic candidate for the 1st District of New Mexico. I look forward. We need to help him. We can't rest on our laurels, but I look forward to him serving us well, not only for the community in New Mexico, but for our whole country. I also wanted to let my friends know that Damon, the reason Damon got on my radar screen and I'm so passionate about his candidacy and learning more about it is that a great friend to the show, frequent contributor, and really part of my family in some level, Abigail Collazo is your campaign manager. So I want to let people know that not only is Damon fought for women's issues like domestic violence and supporting Planned Parenthood, but he puts his hiring where his ideology is and hires a strong Latina and a strong Boricua woman to run his campaign. So Abigail is a great friend, and I believe I connected with Abigail through Twitter because she was live tweeting Wendy Davis's brave stand in the Texas legislature several years ago, which put Wendy on the map nationally. And I thought she was literally sitting next to Wendy. I don't think she was in the hall in Austin, but it felt like that. And she got a lot of buzz, and we connected because of our last names, and we've had a strong allied partnership. So Abigail, all the best to you. I hope you're enjoying the great New Mexico cuisine and the weather. Certainly better than what we have out here. Damon Martinez, let people know again the website. Anything else you'd like to share with our Race Talk Show listeners?
Well, Abigail's sitting here next to me. She's sending her best. She's waving, and let me just say we're very proud to have her here in New Mexico. She's obviously, well, I consider her like my probation officer now at this point. But she's an incredible talent, and we're very happy to have her.
Wonderful, wonderful. And again, you can check out, learn more, and donate more, just as importantly, to Damon Martinez for Congress.com. That's Damon, D-A-M-O-N, like the baseball player Johnny Damon. Damon Martinez for Congress.com. Damon, all the best to you. Hopefully we'll be in touch through Abigail down the stretch, and look forward to continue the conversation, and best to your primary election in a few months.
Well, thank you, and thank you for this opportunity.
Elbert, talking about leadership and first-time candidates, people jumping into the political fray as candidates. You had you were part of organizing some very interesting conversations with women of color this week on precisely those those topics.
Yeah, we did. It's Women's History Month, and I think it's always in light of not just the Me Too movement, but also in knowing. I think Ray, you and I are among a bunch of folks who understand that, although they may not get a quote unquote official titles, women, our mothers, our sisters, our aunts, they've been doing the work for a long time and not getting the recognition. And so, we down in Florida, organized these kind of two online conversations to specifically talk about not women in leadership, because we know there's enough women leaders around in our community doing the work that's supposed to get done so we could improve the lives of children and families and communities, but getting them to be elected officials, right? Getting them to run for office, getting them to be a part of the political system, and not just necessarily as elected officials, but as campaign managers and chief of staff and other crucial elements, finance directors, right? So how do you do that? And I think it's real interesting to hear the challenges, the obstacles, the support networks that women of color are now using to try to organize in the political space, right? And one thing that certainly came in mind, especially down here in Florida, is figuring out how to build power and how to put our best candidates and our best leaders in positions to deliver for our communities, and how to do that. A lot of times it means being independent and transforming transforming or attempting to transform those local political parties, right? Because, in a lot of political races, there are, time frames. There are, people who are supposed to be ahead of you, people who, people who are asked, right? I mean, a number of the women talked about, in today's Latina one, Senator Netta Dare, I remember specifically was talking about how, in talking to other potential women candidates, they've talked about how, but no one's actually ever asked me to run.
Well, what's interesting, Albie, what's interesting about when I was watching the Latinx webinar today, what was interesting is that you had two elected officials there, one state representative, Amy Mercado, and Annette Tadeo, the state senator in South Florida, is that they're essentially like the only, I believe Annette Tadeo is the first Latina Democrat to represent South Florida in the state Senate, and Amy Mercado is the only Puerto Rican Democratic woman in the state legislature. So it's interesting how, going to this point about no one ever asked me, or I haven't had that support system to sort of spark my interest, is that even these young people in 2018 are in some of these communities, we're still having pioneers. So I thought that was very interesting. What did you learn, Elbert? I mean, you interact with women of color leaders quite a bit, and shout out to the head of the Florida Majority, Andrea Mercado, was one of the people that was one of the leads of putting these activities together with you. What did you learn? I'm sure there's something. What surprised you about these conversations that maybe weren't as obvious to you before these webinars this week?
I think, I think it made clear, at least in the area of politics, some things that I know, in personal life, right? Which is that, I think that our women, definitely black women and Latina women, we're used to them, on the front lines, holding the fort, right? We're used to their resilience. In many ways, we depend on their resilience, right? And the question has to be, why aren't we doing more to support them, to step out of their way, to create the spaces and maintain the spaces so that they can learn and grow, and not just as elected officials, but in other positions that we know are important to getting folks elected. This idea of imposter syndrome, right? Which I think you hear about in other careers, like the law, some other stuff. I mean, those are things that our sisters are grappling with, right? When they move forward, right? And I think what was kind of eye-opening to me, just listening to that, is not just their support systems are there and their support networks are there, but I don't want to say they need our help, right? Because they're badasses, right? They know how to do stuff and get stuff done. I'm always amazed when I hear, the profile, a lot of, not just in Florida, but I think a lot across the nation, a lot of elected women of color, sometimes they're not in the spotlight because they're doing the work, right? And I think part of it is how do we make a space for us to recognize not just non-traditional leaders, which we're always trying to do, but also the traditional ways that people lead, right? And lifting that up.
But
right?
also,
that they're there.
But also, not get caught up in the profile or the assumption, there's the stereotype now of the super black woman, the super Latina that, they need support as well, and they can't do it all, and we can't take advantage of their leadership to assume that they're going to take on all this responsibility and all these tasks and all these multitasking and all these roles when you have to, everyone, including these women, deserve a support network around them to help elevate their platform and do it in a way so that they don't have to kill themselves, and so they have that they're afforded the way all of us deserve to be afforded the opportunity to have life balance.
And that's the takeaway from their leadership. I think a lot of times, for example, we're so used to saying, especially in terms of male leadership, he's assembled a great team, right? And you're able to bring in a bunch of different folks, and that doesn't take away from his from his leadership. In fact, it actually amplifies it more, right?
Well, the president's central argument is that he was not only good at assembling teams, but he was good at firing people, like dismantling his team. He got kudos for that, incredibly enough.
And if a woman does that, then she's not, right? Think about it, right? Like if a woman is firm with her team, or someone's not doing the job well, and she has to let them go, right? Then something like we fall into these terms a lot of times with thinking about women leaders as calling them, like saying that they're really hard to work for, or they're bitches, or that like whatever, and again all these different kind of things, and we have to ask ourselves, we don't actually do that to men, right? And so I think for me it's about kind of at least kind of listening to these tales, really kind of taking a step back and saying, are we holding folks accountable, and are each other accountable for how we treat and support each other, and the lens in which we judge people by? Because although we want to be we want to be better, the truth is that we do judge people, right? We do have bars and metrics and things like that, and I think what I'm excited about is that I think the inclusion of more women in leadership positions will just kind of change the game, so it's a little more humanistic and a little more empathetic and a little more grounded in what the real work is supposed to be.
And in the case of the work you're doing in Florida, definitely move the process of making Florida more of a bluish, purplish hue and bluer for sure, and do it in a way that is builds up the community, not just for party preference. Wanted to talking about elections and candidates and sort of changing the dynamics of politics in our communities. The big elections that took place this week were out in the Chi, much respect to our friends out in Chicago, where Jesus Chuy Garcia, as expected, won the Democratic primary to take to be the new congressman in Congressman Luis Gutierrez's district. He'll be retiring at the end of this term. And so what was significant about Jesus Chuy Garcia's victory, one sort of a culmination or of a long career, having his ups and downs, sort of trying to forge his progressive, independent Latino political organization in Chicago. But the fact that he had very strong coattails. So 3 different candidates, all of them under 40 years old, including Alma Anaya for county board, Beatriz Frausto Sandoval for circuit judge, and 26-year-old Aaron Ortiz for state representative, all won on Chuy's slate. In doing so, in the case of Aaron Ortiz, the state representative candidate beat current state representative Dan Burke, which is significant because Representative Burke's brother, Alderman Ed Burke, is basically the most powerful Democratic machine alderman in ward politics in Chicago. He's led the Southwest, what they call in the Chi, white ethnic Democratic Party organization. The people in the old school Polish and Eastern European neighborhoods of the South and Southwest side of Chicago. And so now this puts Alderman Burke in a very isolated position. He's now sort of the last old white guy in Chuy Garcia's sort of political sphere there. And so it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But I wanted to mention this election, not just because it's important for national politics. Chuy's going to have very big shoes to fill, but in terms of this election and this slate really being a model for how Latinos can develop, not only be successful in winning elections, but in these particular communities like a Chicago, like a New York, like a Philadelphia, like a Houston, Texas, like a Phoenix, Arizona, where you have in many cases sort of Democratic, these are Democratic dominant communities, but Latinos have a hard time, oftentimes have a harder time or as hard a time moving up the political ladder in a way that is we're really able to represent the community in an authentic way. So Elbert, as someone that's worked in New York City politics, New York State politics, you're no stranger to Democratic Party machine politics. So what lessons can we learn from Chuy Garcia and his slate's sweeping victories in Chicago this week?
Well, I think that one of the things that we can learn from is that politics is not it's not one of these like one and done kind of deals, right? You've got to do the work, and the work of building at the end of it, to accomplish accomplish these tasks that have to get done in terms of like changing policy and moving people from from poverty to some sort of stability, into economic stability. It's all about relationships. It's all about like being able not just to explain your position, but to actually have an open ear on the other side. And to do that, you've got to build trust. I think what often gets left out of the discussion is that for many of our communities, or communities who are either historically or currently marginalized, or where people don't have power, it is a trust issue of having been let down before, right? It's about rebuilding trust, right? About rebuilding care. We sometimes put the blame on voters in these communities, and we kind of blame them for not coming out or not holding folks accountable. But at the same time, we don't acknowledge that they've been let down, right? Or that the resources that have been promised to them may not have gotten to them. Right?
Well, I mean, but that's do as I, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? Because that happens a lot of times where, they're a Latino with good intent, or anybody really, but particularly Latinos that are sort of, these communities are newer to political power and these kind of political dynamics. They'll get into the game with good intentions, and then the Democratic Party will tell them, to do things a certain way. And then, like you just said, then they're not given what they're promised, because at the end of the day, nobody's going to give you anything. And I've heard from so many people around the country. I've had this conversation too many times where it's like, oh, the party told me not to worry about raising my own money. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you really think they're going to raise money for someone that doesn't do anything? Either A, they're not going to do that. They're BSing you because they want you to be in a weak position because they're setting you up for failure. Or B, even if you are to win a position that way, you're going to be completely beholden to what the party machinery, in this case Democratic Party machinery in that local community, wants you to do, because you didn't bring anything to the table other than your Spanish language last name and maybe your own community credibility. So this dynamic happens a lot, and I think it shows, A, we can raise our own money, we can build our own networks. It certainly shows the power of resiliency. Chuy's been in the game, for decades out there, and has had his ups and downs, won elections, lost elections, kind of been out the spotlight for a while, and now has come back over recent years. And it shows that, we can do this. I mean, we had people in their 20s, their 30s running for office, showing enthusiasm, raising money, getting people excited about it. And Chuy was able to build a team around him and empower these young people. You didn't have to get a 26-year-old to run against, this. He could have picked someone, an easier choice, but he was bold and picked young, exciting candidates that are reflective of the community. Shout out to Jeff Cruz, Bill Velasquez, Mike Rodriguez, a lot of my homies that were involved in this race. And I look forward to having Chuy and the Chicago crew on the show. Elbert, before we get to our shout-outs, we got to talk about payasos republicanos behaving badly. We had 2 incidents this week. I mean, there probably were others, but these are just the ones that got on my radar screen, of Republican members of Congress, as P once said, just being suckers, racist, and plain. So Alabama Mike D. Rogers, after delegate from Puerto Rico in Congress, non-voting member of Congress, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, spoke at a hearing, referenced the fact that he was happy to speak to someone at the hearing that did not speak with an accent, but then only to be topped by Texas Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert, who tweeted the other day that he was proud to announce that on Cesar Chavez's birthday, he was putting a bill in the House to be considered to name National Border Security Day on to commemorate Cesar Chavez's birthday. Lalo Alcaraz to Congressman Gohmert's tweet had a fantastic reply. Lalo said, "Oh, I'm declaring Louis Gohmert's birthday Cue Ball Douchebag Day." And you could read the whole bill in the profile, and it was a middle finger emoji. Lalo, great job. So, Elbert, my question to you is, are Republicans getting more racist in the Trump world? Or are they feeling like they could just be more honest about their racism in the Trump world?
Ray, I think there's the one thing that...
This is some shit right here, dog. I mean, this ain't like normal rate. Like, this ain't normal.
No.
They're not hiding it anymore.
I think if you talk to most people or folks of color who live in these kind of situations, but this doesn't surprise them. I think what surprises folks who aren't used to understanding that is that we've gotten to the point where people talk about leadership, right, and behaviors, right? And I think in some ways we were so used to 8 years of, even if you disagree with his policy, President Obama, for the most part, kind of was an adult, right? Or at least the adult that we tell our children that adults should be. Took responsibility for his actions,
wasn't racist, wasn't sexist, wasn't an asshole. Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah, he was a decent human being.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I think what has happened is that people have seen, look, man, politics is a lot about people following the lead of other people, right? There's a lot of folks, it's like, we used to always laugh in Washington Heights because, like, if a barbershop was doing really well, then like 3 or 4 different barbershops opened down the block, right? And it's like, can't you just come up with like a bakery or something else? Like, why do you have to do the same thing over? It's the same thing with people, right? Like, people, I just feel like if people, there's a lack of respect and civility that the president has taken to another level, right? Because I'm not going to say like civility was all fine and good during the Obama years. Clearly it wasn't, right? Because Republicans were acting a fool in that kind of way as well, right?
Yeah, they were blaming racism on Obama.
Acting a fool too, right? Like
by being black, basically. Like, it was his fault. Racial divisions, they would say racial divisions were being caused by Obama, and because basically he was a black person that had some power.
Right. That's freaking ridiculous, right? But this is another level. This is some next level, like, BS and bullying. And so I'm not going to go so far as to say that that people are more racist or not, right? I think these kind of ideas and stuff, don't just show up one day. They bubble up to the surface. They're as much a product of what people are allowed, but also what people are taught, right? But I do think that there's no consequences for those kind of actions anymore, right? At least politically, right? People can get away with that, but people feel like they can get away with it because they can feel like their people are going to elect them again, right? And we saw 20,000 folks in some part of the country, I forget what part, if it was St. Louis or Chicago, vote for a known Nazi, not like a Nazi sympathizer, right? But like a declared
Republican
Nazi,
primary
right?
in Illinois. That's right. I forget his name, but I know you're talking about it.
8,000 people did that, and so I think part of that is the scary reality is that we live in a niche world, and some people feel like, oh, well, if you've got a political niche, conservative, whatever, well, I can be the niche of the racist guy, right? And there's going to be somebody that's going to talk to me, someone's going to deliver my news to me, someone's going to even deliver my paper, my groceries to me, so there's no consequences for that. No consequences for an elected official who does that. He or she's still going to get elected. Yes, it's true, they'll get swamped by media, perhaps, or social media. But if they, but something's not going to happen to them. Again, compare that to, some of the immediate consequences that the Me Too movement has gotten among folks who have done a bunch of different things, and some of that fall into sexual harassment. Like, there are consequences to that. People getting fired, people's contracts not getting renewed, those kind of things like that. At the end of the day, we are not doing that when it comes to these kind of racist acts.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. That's right. No,
and to me, is the sadder.
And what's so frustrating about
it? For a couple of years, right?
What's so frustrating about it is that, in thinking about sort of the aftermath of the 2016 elections, when there was this this messaging that was coming from Trump supporters, not from all, but from some, saying no, that this wasn't about race. This was, Hillary's a bitch basically, and she's not trustworthy in the emails, and he was talking about the things that we care about in our economic anxieties, and we're either gonna hold him accountable for racism if it manifests. That he was just talking crazy. And now that it's even worse than I think on some level we would have imagined. Those folks are very conveniently silent and not checking. And so I think they're really showing their true colors. And what's so frustrating is the lack of accountability, not just to the elected officials, but to these voters and our neighbors and people that maybe on a moment-to-moment level are nice people to you passing, but are not admitting to themselves that they either are harboring these feelings or don't have the strength and the leadership to stand up to their neighbors and friends that have now put our country literally in peril by hiring a dangerous person to be in the White House and someone that's willing to hire John Bolton to be his national security advisor, as we saw today, and many other dangerous decisions that are taking place. And if our community were to have such how would you say such grievances, we would be told, well, get involved in the process, register to vote, run for office, for these pockets of our nation to simply sort of blow off some steam by voting for a nut to piss some liberals off is very irresponsible. And I think we're not having the conversations that we need to have, and that's why we have Ray's Talk Show. Thank you, Elbert. You've brought a lot to the table as always. Before we get into our shout out segment, Elbert, remind people where they can find you on social media.
Social media, you can find me best way, I guess, on Twitter is Elbert Garcia FL. Have been doing a lot more work than writing these days, but appearances like this one here with Ray gives me a lot of hope and stuff there. But they can find me Elbert Garcia FL. And you can always also use that one on Facebook as well. That's my public also page where I try to do a lot of sharing and insights into the stuff that we say here on the show.
Yeah, so in our shout-out segment, I wanted to shout out, before I started taping, I saw a very cool video segment. It's the Hispanicized Conference, which is one of the preeminent convenings of Latino social media influencers in the country, which will be taking place in Elbert's part of the world in April. Announced sort of Oscar style the nominations for their Tecla Awards for Outstanding Achievement of Latinos in Social Media, and our girl, the Cuban abuela Jenny Lorenzo, hosted the sort of web Facebook Live earlier today, and they actually are having a category for favorite podcasts. And want to shout out our friends Morado Lens, our homegirls Cindy and Natalie, there was some other podcasts, but the other one, which has definitely the best name for a podcast, had down the Dique Podcast, which is run by a Dominican young woman out of North Jersey. Just a shout out to, I believe all the podcasts that were named were, and Latinos Out Loud, with Rachel La Loca, and was it Juan Bago? Those folks? Yeah, that's a good podcast. So, and Miss Ruffin out in the West Coast. I forget the name of her podcast. But anyway, much respect to our friends in the podcast world. And we are moving, as the Jeffersons once sang, we are moving on up. No doubt about it here in the Brown podcast world. Elbert, your shout out.
Well, I want to give a shout out definitely to Big Papi to Big Papi this week. He was at an awards kind of award ceremony in the DR.
For all the Dominican ballers, man, in DR. I'm surprised, Elbert, you weren't there on the red carpet.
Well, I had some other things and ideas, it's a tough calendar. But he was out there and he used the opportunity to really talk about the issues in DR, specifically around femicide and the killing of women and other transgendered women. Women have higher rates of death through the hands of their loved ones and their partners in the Dominican Republic. It's they've got one of the highest rates in the Western Hemisphere in terms of that. And so really kind of he was talking about the need, to stop that. And for us to take, us particularly as men, and as Dominican men to do something about that, right? And that's in the context of a lot of hatred and xenophobia that has been, again, it hasn't stopped for the last couple of years, but kind of is bubbling anew in the Dominican Republic, around in terms of the treatment of Haitians, both who have necessarily across the border immigrated to the Dominican Republic, but also people of Dominicans of Haitian descent, and that is also being led these days also by I believe it's a grandson or great grandson of the dictator, famous dictator Trujillo, who is basically running, and trying to give fire to those kind of sentiments in a very, kind of mirroring the alt-right, here in the United States. And so there's definitely been a movement of a bunch of folks. Shout out to folks like, Armando Alcantara, who's the editor-in-chief of a fantastic magazine and platform called La Galeria, which is a magazine in the States about Dominican, kind of affairs and policies and things like that, and culture, and so here in the States. Shout out to folks like Mezcla, to the folks over at Mezcla, who are also kind of paying attention to those kind of things there. So kind of want to give a shout out to Big Papi for doing that, and to all those folks who are leading protests, against this kind of treatment of Haitians, and in general, just this anti-blackness, trying to push back and say that that's not, that's either not who we are, or certainly not who we should be as Dominicans. Also wanted to give on a political tip, a couple hours ago I found out that one of our Dominican folks here in Florida, Philip Perez, who is actually, right, you may not know, Columbia College class of 05, I think.
Oh, okay.
This Dominican cat has been named the political director for the Andrew Gillum campaign. We had a pretty good week this week.
Very good. I see the fundraising numbers are improving. Good stuff, yeah.
So he's named un Dominicano, to be his campaign's political director. So shout out to Philip, in terms of for making that happen. Philip's been I spent the last couple of years working on Debbie Wasserman Schultz's staff.
Okay.
Guy, I think he may be also a new leaders council guy.
Okay.
So good young cat here. Doing always those community events at 7:00 or 8:00 at night. You're traveling, and also a former high school teacher as well. So so just to Philip,
very cool. Very, very cool. And we're going to continue to monitor the Florida governor's race. I think that's going to be one of the most interesting races in the country to watch. And our great friend Andrew Gillum fighting a good fight in the Democratic primary. It's a crowded field, but he's running a very strong race. Thank you so much, Elbert Garcia, my dear Dominican brother, for joining us here on Ray's Talk Show. If you like to listen to the perspective of politics from a Latino perspective, and also touch on some of the hottest issues our community's dealing with, you must continue to check out, support, subscribe, share, write reviews for Ray's Talk Show. We really appreciate all the help. Again, you can listen to us anywhere you can download or subscribe to a podcast, and continue the conversations on social media at Ray's Podcast, and email us at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. Elbert, we are less than 10 days away from the 5th year anniversary of Ray's Talk Show. Now it's trite. Everyone has a podcast, but we've been in the game quite some time. We're very proud of that. And so we're going to continue talking here, as the Collazo and Garcias are apt to do. So, Elbert, enjoy your weekend, brother, and we'll be in touch very soon.
Most definitely, Ray. Have a good night, and good night to everybody.